Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, the last webinar for this year, just at the tail end of November. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I am on Gadigal land, pay my respects to elders past and present, and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. We are here today to talk about emergent treatments for methamphetamine use disorder. I am joined by a fabulous panel of people today. I'm really excited that everyone is able to join us. I'd like to ask people to turn their cameras on as I introduce you. So first up, we have Acheson, who's an early career clinical researcher. This PhD was awarded in June of this year. Their current research focuses on marginalised populations and the clinical outcomes, including interventions to address methamphetamine use disorder through clinical trials of pharmacotherapies, including lisdexamfetamine, psilocybin, naltrexone, bupropion, ketamine, and the impact smartphone application. Liam works on a broad range of clinical research projects with mixed method techniques and has started an independent program of research investigating the intersection of sleep and substance use, particularly methamphetamine use. So I'm very pleased to welcome Liam, who is here with me on Gadigal land. Hi, Liam. The next person I'm really pleased to introduce is Victoria Manning. Victoria is a professor in addiction studies at Monash University and head of research and workforce development at Turning Point. She told us today she has been working in that sector since the last millennium. She's worked as a clinical research and addiction treatment services for 25 years in the UK, Singapore and Australia. Her primary research interests are in psychological and neurocognitive treatment interventions and advancing the evidence base for peer support mutual aid. She's also involved in teaching as a lecturer and unit coordinator on the graduate program in addictive behaviours and is a smart recovery facilitator. Victoria's been awarded over $12 million in research grants, including several NH and MRC projects, and has published over 170 peer-reviewed papers to date. So we're really pleased to have you. Thank you, Vic. Are you on Wurundjeri land? Where are you?
Wurundjeri land, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. The next person I'd like to introduce is Wendy, who's an Aboriginal health worker at St Vincent's Hospital, Sydney in the Alcohol and Other Drug Service, having previously worked as an Aboriginal peer support worker in mental health. She has a keen passion for supporting clients with their substance use through a trauma-informed and culturally sensitive lens. Hi, Wendy. I don't know where you are right now because you're in a car. Do you want to just say hi to everyone and let us know where you are?
Hey, everybody. I couldn't tell you what land I'm on at the moment.
You're actually moving, I can see. I hope you're not driving and talking.
No, got to keep up with the law.
Thanks, Wendy. Welcome. And finally, I'm really pleased that we're also joined by Angus, who's Angus Mason, is a Gomeroi man living and working on the lands of the Awabakal people in the beautiful city of Newcastle. He's an Aboriginal researcher and peer support worker with a passion for closing the gap and getting consumers involved in research. So we're really pleased to have you too, Angus. Thank you so much. All right, so we'll get going. Liam is kindly going to do a presentation summarising where we're at with the evidence. The rest of us are just going to shut off our cameras so that we can concentrate on Liam, and then we'll be back for more questions. Please, if you do have questions as we're going along, pop them in the, sorry, Harriet, is the Q&A section or the chat box that people are?
Q&A.
Q&A, so please pop them in the Q&A so we can answer them as we're going along. And over to you now, Liam.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and thanks everybody for coming. It's a great privilege to be able to present this here for you all today. Just a small disclaimer, this is really going to be a kind of whirlwind tour of where we're at the moment with research for methamphetamine use disorder. We're going to touch on a lot of things, and we're not going to go into any really great detail about much. But if you have any questions or you want to follow up with me afterwards, please reach out. My contact details will be at the end. I would also like to, of course, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. This presentation was prepared on Gadigal land, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are here today. I also just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the community of people who use drugs and thank them for their continued contribution to research. The research presented here today represents the contributions of literally thousands of people who use drugs. I just wanted to take some time to acknowledge their continued impact on research. These are my conflicts of interest. I'm employed by NCCRED, and I have no other conflicts to declare. So really briefly, just to get started, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about methamphetamine use disorder globally and in Australia and how we approach it from a treatment perspective. So methamphetamine use disorder is a growing global issue, and Australia is estimated to be a world leader in proportion of people with methamphetamine use disorder. Methamphetamine use disorder has, of course, been associated with a variety of health issues, including mortality, mental health, risk of bloodborne virus infection. But what's really important is that the harms associated with methamphetamine use are increasing. This is really clearly reflected in the local context here as well. This graph, it's a little bit out of date now, but what it represents is 10 years of treatment service utilization in Australia. And if you look at the green line that's been extending over the past 10 years, you can see that amphetamine use has become a growing problem. Amphetamines now represent the second most common drug of concern in Australian treatment settings. This is behind only alcohol. And there's been a 5-fold increase in amphetamine-related treatment episodes in the last decade. It's also the second most common primary drug of concern for withdrawal management cases. And all of these treatment episodes are despite the many barriers to accessing treatment that we have, especially for a drug like amphetamines, where we don't have any kind of approved pharmacotherapeutic options for people. The mainstay of current treatment for methamphetamine use disorder is psychosocial. And in thinking about this, I kind of broke it down into two different kind of groups. The first is kind of a counseling-based therapy. And this is delivered by healthcare workers. It can be a structured or unstructured and delivered through things like treatment programs, alcohol and drug services, counseling services, psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. But it's also really important to acknowledge the community-based services as well. And these are often delivered by people with a lived or a living experience or community organizations, including NGOs. These include things like your group services, which of course can be delivered in person or online, 12-step programs, residential rehabilitation, and then extending out more broadly into your peer orgs, doing their harm reduction activities, your needle and syringe programs. There's very limited medication use for methamphetamine use disorder at the moment, and what there is tends to be prescribed off-label because there are no approved pharmacotherapeutic options. Now, of course, the services can be unstructured and they can be really dependent on clinician and location of the person. And this can have really important knock-on effects to the quality of care that people can receive in this country. So there is a really big gap that desperately needs to fill. Now, these treatments, it has to be said, they do work for a lot of people. Especially things like counseling and 12-step programs. They can help people to meet their goals, but they don't meet the needs of our incredibly diverse community. There is a community desire for new treatments that can help people to manage their methamphetamine use. And these are both going to be pharmacological or psychological treatment. And I think what's really important as we go through all this research is there's going to be a lot. It may seem a little scattered, going through all these different kinds of approaches. But even if we find things that work, we'll never, I believe, find a one-size-fits-all solution. And we need to have multiple pharmacological and psychological options so that we can meet the diverse needs of our community. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run you through the state of the pharmacological research into methamphetamine use disorder. And when I was doing my pre-reading for this talk, I found the first randomized control trial for methamphetamine use disorder, medication for methamphetamine use disorder that I was aware of was actually published 30 years ago this year. So we've got 30 years of research into medication treatments for methamphetamine use disorder. And we've looked at a lot of medications, over 25 different options. There has been global-ish interest, but the vast majority of studies to date have been conducted in the USA. Others have been conducted in countries like Iran, Australia, and European countries. But there does tend to be a really severe lack of any evidence for lower and middle income countries. We've looked at a really wide variety of drug classes, and I'm not going to go through all of these. Just know that there is a lot, and there are more currently under investigation. But what I'm going to focus on really quickly in this talk are antidepressants, stimulants, and opioid antagonists, which seem to be three of the kind of more exciting and actively researched treatment options at the moment. So first up is mirtazapine. Mirtazapine is a tetracyclic antidepressant, which importantly increases the release of serotonin and noradrenaline in the brain. The reason why we've been looking at this is we think that increasing these monoamine levels, so the levels of serotonin and noradrenaline, will help to alleviate methamphetamine craving and withdrawal symptoms. When it's compared to other antidepressants, mirtazapine has a relatively low time to reach active levels, so you need to take it for about 2 weeks before it really starts to work. But I think quite importantly, it's also relatively inexpensive and it's highly available globally as well. There are, of course, side effects with all medications, and mirtazapines include things like sleepiness, weight gain, dry mouth, and increased appetite. And importantly, like with other antidepressants, it may paradoxically increase rates of depression, anxiety, or suicidality. Now, mirtazapine has been investigated for methamphetamine use disorder with quite a high level of success, actually. So the first RCTs investigating mirtazapine were conducted in San Francisco, specifically in sexually active men who have sex with men. This first study randomized 60 men to receive either mirtazapine or a matched placebo. And they found that the mirtazapine arm had fewer methamphetamine positive urine drug screens. And the risk of having a positive methamphetamine urine drug screen was about half if you're on the mirtazapine. They then replicated this study with 120 cis men and trans women who have sex with men and got similar results. This again, though, was conducted in San Francisco in America and only with men or trans women who have sex with men. So what this means is that the current evidence is it's really difficult to generalize this to other populations. However, there were some really promising signals around mirtazapine. So to try and extend this and look into this a little bit more, our colleague Rebecca McKetton has been conducting a clinical trial she calls the TINA trial. This is being done here in Australia at the moment. It's a double-blind randomized control trial, including people of any gender or any sexual identity. They want to enroll 340 people, and it's funded by the MRFF. What they're trialing is 30 milligrams a day of mirtazapine or matched placebo for 12 weeks, as they did in San Francisco. And the participants also received some self-help booklets, referrals to local services, and they could access usual care as well during the study. And the study is currently ongoing in Wollongong, Geelong, Brisbane, Perth, Townsville, and Adelaide. And they have enrolled 329 people to date. The trial is anticipated to finish recruitment this year, and we are really excited to see the results of this and to see if we can maybe extend the findings from San Francisco in the very specific population to a more general population here in Australia. Next up, I wanted to touch briefly on psychostimulants. And these specifically, we're talking about amphetamines. And the way that amphetamines work is they increase extracellular dopamine, noradrenaline, and to a lesser extent, serotonin. But the reason why we're interested in these drugs is because they work on agonist principles. And there's very good evidence that agonist-like drugs can help with other substances. This means giving a drug that works in a similar way to help to alleviate some of the withdrawal and the use disorder. These drugs in general tend to be relatively cheap, relatively available. Lisdexamphetamine is still, however, expensive. It's on label in Australia and there have been supply issues. But what I think is very important about amphetamines and stimulants is the psychoactive effect is immediate and short acting. So you don't need to wait around for a couple of weeks before you can get the true psychoactive effect like you do with other drug classes. Now, lisdexamphetamine is, of course, something that we're really interested in here at NDARC. And early studies showed that high-dose dexamphetamine could reduce dependence and withdrawal severity for people who use methamphetamine. However, there were issues around adequate dosing and a requirement for either multiple-day dosing or extended release formulations. And that's part of the evidence that led us to looking at lisdexamphetamine, which in short is a chemically slow-release formulation of dexamphetamine. So the psychoactive component of lisdexamphetamine is the same as dexamphetamine. Now, we recently completed a study called the Lima trial. And this was a randomized control trial of 250 milligrams of lisdexamphetamine for 12 weeks. And they enrolled 164 people. And this study found that over that 12-week period, people in the lisdexamphetamine treatment group used methamphetamine on 8.8 fewer days than those in the placebo group, which was, of course, really exciting. However, as you can see from the graph, the lines do converge, and there is only very weak evidence that this reduction can be maintained over the last 4 weeks and post-treatment. There is also, of course, preliminary pilot data that lisdexamphetamine might reduce withdrawal symptoms. So, of course, there are ongoing investigations for lisdexamphetamine. They were really exciting signals, and those have helped some other big clinical trials to get started, the first of which is being conducted in Norway, which is using a similar approach to what we did here, so lisdexamphetamine plus treatment as usual. And there's another Canadian study, very exciting, where they combine lisdexamphetamine with a course of contingency management, both of which aim to help reduce people who use methamphetamine. For methamphetamine withdrawal as well, we're just about to start a randomized control trial of lisdexamphetamine for the treatment of acute methamphetamine withdrawal. We're looking to help people get through that really tough first week of withdrawal, enrolling 184 people across 5 sites. Recruitment will begin in early 2025. And if anybody is interested in more information about that study or wants to participate, you can follow that QR code and that'll take you to our website, where that'll have all the information, including how to get involved once we open up recruitment. The final medication class I just wanted to talk about briefly was a combination of an antidepressant and an opioid antagonist. Now, the reason why we started combining medications is because in the past, monotherapies have traditionally not been super effective. And in recent years, one approach has been to combine these 2 drugs, bupropion and naltrexone. Now, bupropion is an atypical antidepressant. It acts through the noradrenaline and dopamine system, providing a stimulating effect, and it also could ameliorate the dysphoria associated with methamphetamine cessation. Naltrexone is, of course, the opioid antagonist, but it's also been shown to have quite a modest effect in treating alcohol use disorder. And we think that this is by attenuating the reinforcing effects of substances or cue-induced cravings. Cue-induced, of course, means you see something, you want something. Now, previous studies have looked at these drugs alone, and they found some promising signals, but neither one significantly reduced methamphetamine use by themselves. So a group of researchers out of the United States decided to combine these two into a sequentially parallel randomized control trial using an injectable formulation of naltrexone. This was a depot injection, and they gave it every 3 weeks, as well as oral extended release bupropion, and they included 403 people in their trial. This trial was really exciting. They found that 11% more, there were 11% more negative urines in the treatment arm compared to the placebo arm. And while this was a relatively modest effect size, it was really exciting because it was a really well-conducted, conservatively interpreted clinical trial with clearly positive results. And this has actually already started to be reflected in US treatment guidelines, with them allowing the possibility of people in the United States to be treated with naltrexone and bupropion. However, what's important for us here in Australia is that these results are not immediately translatable. And this is because the formulations that they used, in particular, the depot injection, is not available in Australia at all. As of yet, things might change in the future. But what NCCRED's tried to do recently is to look at different formulations. So NCCRED recently completed recruitment of a pilot study looking at a locally available oral formulation of these medications, which are actually currently sold in Australia as a diet pill. We've recently finished recruitment for this study, but we haven't analyzed the data yet, so we can't tell you any results. But if this oral formulation is safe and feasible and people actually like to take it, then we'll be able to conduct larger RCTs to determine the efficacy of these formulations and see if we can't translate those American results into an Australian context. Now, in America, of course, one study is generally not enough to completely change the clinical practice. And there are already multiple replication studies of this treatment being conducted in America. And this will be able to confirm the results of Trivedi's study and hopefully provide additional information to inform how we can adapt this treatment for clinical practice. So very, very exciting stuff here. I also just wanted to touch really briefly on psychosocial approaches to methamphetamine use disorder. And when I say psychosocial, I guess I kind of mean non-pharmacological. I'm taking a really broad definition for psychosocial interventions for this talk. And we're going to cover, your traditional psychotherapeutic approaches, so cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, stuff like that. But also you might consider things like rehabilitation services, contingency management, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and also digital health interventions. What's really important is that psychosocial interventions are, of course, the cornerstone of our treatment programs, and at least in my opinion, they will remain so no matter what kind of medications we find that can help. Psychosocial treatments are really important because they also allow for flexible delivery of services, long-term engagements, and in some of the less traditional approaches, they allow for accessing populations that are incredibly hard to reach. They allow for innovative approaches and financial flexibility compared to pharmacological interventions. Now, the first psychosocial intervention I want to talk about is contingency management. So that's something that's come up a few times. When we talk about contingency management, we talk about providing rewards, and these rewards are usually money, for achieving a set goal. And these goals are usually a verified abstinence. So that's a negative urine drug screen. The way these programs work is rewards tend to be low in value in the beginning and then increase in value as sequential goals are achieved. So this means the longer that you are able to provide negative urine drug screens, the more money you tend to get. These treatment programs have not been without controversy, however, and these center around the cost, failure to address the root causes or the social determinants of health. Sometimes these programs are delivered as a prize draw rather than a set number, and there are concerns that that's too parallel to gambling. There are also just general issues around the role of healthcare providers providing care versus providing money, and justice issues surrounding payments. Why does one group of people get money and another group doesn't? So it's not simple, but it has been really heavily researched. And the most recent Cochrane review, which was actually published this year, found 36 different studies assessing contingency management for stimulant use. And that's more than any other individual pharmacotherapy as well. So it's very, very heavily researched. And there have been multiple meta-analyses by different authors which have suggested that contingency management may reduce methamphetamine use and increase treatment attendance and retention. Contingency management has tended to be better, or I say more effective, when combined with other interventions. But really importantly, the effectiveness seems to be tied to a few really important things. So these include substance use severity, i.e. the more severe the substance use disorder is, the less likely contingency management will work. It's more likely to work in participants who are men who have sex with men, or it's been more researched in participants who are men who have sex with men. It's a little unclear. And it also tends to work a lot better in trials conducted in research treatment programs. Replication of these results in real-world settings, i.e. not in research trials, has really yet to be successful. So making that jump from research to treatment is still something that we're not entirely sure about how to achieve yet. But there is a lot of ongoing work. So clinicaltrials.gov, which is the US repository of clinical trials, I had a look last week, and they listed 13 active trials in the US investigating contingency management for methamphetamine use. And they combine these with things like pharmacotherapies, peer-driven contingency management specifically for women, for older people, or for people who use multiple substances. There does seem to be some cautious community desire and provider support for contingency management in Australia. And this has, of course, been spearheaded by some work by Simon Clay and Rebecca McKetton at NDARC. So there are people talking about how to move this forwards here in Australia, but it will face some regulatory evidence and ideological barriers if and when it does become available in Australia. The next thing I just want to touch on really briefly is what we call digital health interventions. And this talks about using technology to help mediate treatment. And this can help us to overcome geographical barriers as well as psychosocial complexities. And this is it's a really broad term, and it spans from, talking on the telephone all the way through self-directed online resources. One of the main kind of technological resources that we use in healthcare is something called telehealth. And telehealth allows people in rural areas to access specialist care, or is also really useful during things like COVID lockdowns. A recent evaluation at St. Vincent's of a highly structured service with a doctor working from St. Vincent's, working with patients and healthcare providers in rural centres, was recently conducted. And we worked with people in Western New South Wales and Murrumbidgee local health districts. And we did find that telehealth was acceptable. And when compared to old models of care, which involved fly-in, fly-out services, it was really acceptable. And yeah, it resulted in either an increase or at least some maintenance of service delivery. And this was even during COVID restrictions. Telephone-delivered interventions, of course, are something that have been used extensively in Australia, specifically for smoking cessation and alcohol, but less so for methamphetamine use disorder. At least until Vic Manning, who's here today, and her Turning Point team have started to look into this. A recent Australian trial of a telephone-delivered brief intervention has just finished recruitment, enrolling over 200 people to receive telephone interventions. And if it works, they think that it can provide a low-cost, scalable treatment for people who are unlikely or unable to access traditional treatment. There's also ways of using digital health to translate kind of traditional care into digital health formats. And we've been working on this in two ways here at NCCRED. The first one is through the SVHA app, which takes a model of care that we've used at the St. Vincent's stimulant treatment program and has translated it into an app format. This redeveloped app will be available soon to the public for anybody to download and use under a cohort trial. And if you follow that QR code, you can access the website to download it. It's not available yet, but it will be soon. We've also tried to convert CBT into an online, self-directed and accessible format using short animated video resources, worksheets, etc. This kind of internet-based CBT is used already in mental health applications. It's currently under development, but that should also be ready to be trialed soon, and we're really excited about that. Psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies are also another way of approaching psychotherapy and medication-assisted treatments. There is a great body, there is a bit of a body of evidence surrounding this kind of approach for mental health, and it has started to enter clinical practice, but there is very limited data available for it for substance use disorders, and almost nothing for methamphetamine use disorder. It's still a little unclear how it's supposed to work. There's talk of the experiential versus the neuroplasticity models, where the experience of taking the psychedelic is the important part of the treatment versus an increase of neuroplasticity, allowing psychotherapy to be more effective. There are, of course, some safety questions around this kind of approach, especially surrounding the quality of the therapy. While anecdotal data does suggest that psychedelics could help people to reduce their use, this, of course, does need experimental confirmation. And there are currently, at least here in Sydney, two different branches of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy ongoing at the moment. The first one is psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for methamphetamine use disorder. There was a recently completed study here at St. Vincent's, which enrolled 15 people. It hasn't been published yet, but there were no safety issues. It was found to be feasible to be delivered. Some really promising signals, but needs to be followed up with randomized control trials. These trials have been planned, and international trials looking into psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for methamphetamine use disorder have already started to crop up. Now, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is a slightly different approach, but recent studies have found that ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is effective at treating depression. NCCRED are just about to start a pilot study of 3 sessions of ketamine plus a manualized CBT for the treatment of methamphetamine use disorder. This will be an open-label pilot study recruiting in early 2025 at St. Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. And finally, of course, are we still progressing with traditional psychosocial interventions? Yes, although it's really not my area. But there was one current trial, very exciting, talking about approach avoidance training, which involves pushing away of images of drugs and pulling closer neutral, unrelated images, which attempts to overwrite attentional and approach biases. There is evidence that this works for alcohol use disorder and has already been translated to German treatment guidelines. promising pilot data and some very exciting randomized control trial results to be expected from Turning Point in Melbourne soon as well. And there are, of course, currently trials looking at CBT ongoing as well. Finally, just before I finish, I just wanted to mention some of the other kind of pipeline blue sky research. These type of studies really don't have much of an evidence base yet, but they are ongoing. And it's kind of a watch this space to see if any of these progress further and have some promising signals. People in the States have started looking at vaccines or antibody therapy for substance use disorders, including methamphetamine. And this involves giving antibodies that remove methamphetamine from the bloodstream before it can even reach the brain. People have also started looking at transcranial magnetic stimulation. This involves using very highly powered magnets above the skull to interact physically with the brain and cause changes in the brain. And almost an extension to this is direct brain stimulation, which involves electrodes being placed directly within the brain using electricity to change the connections in the brain and reduce drug use. Oxytocin is considered to be like the love hormone colloquially. We've just started looking at that for methamphetamine use in women. And a pilot study was recently completed at Turning Point in Melbourne, which we're very excited to hear about. And finally, there are orexin antagonists. These are medications that interact with sleep systems, and there's some very preliminary evidence that they can help with opiate use disorder. And some people in the States are starting to look at them for methamphetamine use disorder as well. So, in conclusion, there are still no effective pharmacotherapies for methamphetamine use disorder. This is despite decades of research. However, there are really promising signals, and some may even consider breakthroughs that have happened recently. It is still, of course, important to recognize that no one treatment will work for everybody, but it is an exciting time to be involved in research for methamphetamine use disorder treatments. I also just wanted to briefly acknowledge the time between a successful clinical trial and getting a medication into clinical practice, and the disjointed role that pharmaceutical industry companies have with substance use disorders, because they tend not to be involved and they are traditionally the ones to drive the registration of these new treatments. We as researchers have to be the ones to then drive through the next steps, through regulation, going on past the clinical trials, making sure that these treatments, if they work and if they can help, can actually reach the people who need them. And I think most importantly as well, this has to be done with community, with lived experience throughout all aspects of the design, implementation, and interpretation of these studies. Thank you all so much for your time. That's my email address if you ever want to get in touch. And if you want to join the NCCRED mailing list for news on upcoming projects, please follow the QR code. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liam. And I'd just like to ask our co-panelists to turn their cameras on if they would. We've got a few questions on the chat that we'll get to in just a minute, because and please keep the questions coming. But before we get going, I just wanted to hear a little bit from Wendy and Angus, because we've heard a lot about the research here from kind of a researcher perspective, and I just wondered if you wanted to tell us what these new treatments might mean for people who are living with methamphetamine use disorder. Do you want to get going first, Wendy?
Yeah, I'm excited about the ketamine with the CBT. I've done CBT treatment with me when I was coming off, so I found it very effective because it made me deal with issues that I needed to deal with, that I was masking. And around like the peer support with it, or when we've done our research with people talking about the trials, they found it easier to talk to somebody that's been through these kind of experiences. So I feel we'll get lot more out of people as we go along.
So you think also it's important to have people with living experience or consumer workers walking alongside people while they're engaged in trials as well? Is that what you think could be helpful?
100%.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Wendy. Angus, did you want to add anything to the conversation?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think with all these new emerging drugs, I think it's really going to give a lot of hope to people struggling with methamphetamine at the moment. Sorry, don't worry about that. Yeah, I'm really excited about the Mirtazapine specifically. That's something which I've been using on and off for years, and it's really helped me. It's really helped me to quit the methamphetamine. It's really helped me with my depression. I don't necessarily agree that it takes 2 weeks to work. I've heard that before. For me, at least, it works pretty much instantly. I was struggling with really bad depression earlier on in the year, and just getting that medication so that I could have, just function normally has been really, really crucial in my recovery as well.
Thanks, Angus. I mean, some people also tell us that that Mirtazapine helps with sleep.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
And that effect probably does work straight away. Even the literature suggests that. So yeah, excellent. All right, thanks, Angus. Vic, just before we get to the question, I'm just going to hand over to you and just ask you to tell us a little bit more about some of the work you're doing in the area, particularly with respect to psychosocial treatments.
Sure, yeah, and thank you, Liam, for such a beautiful overview of where we're at and some of the exciting things on the horizon. So you mentioned the Ready to Change trial that we've been running at Turning Point, and I wish we had the results. We've just finished cleaning the data. That was an HMRC funded trial, and we had about 208 participants with methamphetamine use disorder recruited from the community. And I think what surprised us was just the complexity with which people were seeking treatment. We were overwhelmed with expressions of interest to be in the trial, which speaks to the need for, accessible telephone-based interventions. And a lot of our participants had quite moderate to severe use disorder, which was not the original intention. And a lot of them had previous experiences of treatment. A lot of them have been unable to access treatment, and for reasons such as stigma, had been off-putting. So I think it really highlights that we need to have as many options as possible. The new digital interventions, the new psychosocial interventions, contingency management. As you rightly said, Liam, there is no one size fits all. We have to sort of end this pursuit for a single pill or a single approach. And we absolutely desperately need more funding to have those large trials where we can have multi-component approaches and do multifactorial design, so we can start to tease out what combinations of medications or psychosocial interventions or digital supports actually help people.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think I like your comment around having to have more funding and more research effort. I mean, Liam, you did present the number of different drug classes that have been studied, but the efforts are small scale. And, if we looked at what we could do collectively in COVID, and we know what we can do collectively for something like hypertension, we just haven't seen that research effort for this particular area, or even for substance use disorders in general, I don't think. So I think that's a good point.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to highlight that most of the studies that have been done, at least for medications, are underpowered. They're really small studies, and they're almost exclusively funded by government or universities. So we've very limited pharmaceutical industry input, which means it's harder to get the money to fund the big studies and to do the complex analyses that we need.
Thank you. I'm just going to go now to some of these really fascinating questions that we're getting here. And the first question I'm going to take a stab at answering. So the question is, has disoxin been studied, or is it deemed too high risk? Now, disoxin is an oral form of methamphetamine. It's not available here in Australia. It is available in the United States for the treatment of obesity and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children. And back in the mid-2000s, about 2008, there was a pilot study done looking at methamphetamine orally as a treatment for cocaine use disorder. But once methamphetamine started to emerge as a drug that people were seeking treatment for, that research effort stopped in the US. We don't have it here in Australia. So even if we wanted to study it, if it worked, then there wouldn't be a treatment pathway for people to take it up. So it hasn't been studied, even though it seems like kind of an obvious solution. So thank you for that question. It still would have the similar risks that we're seeing with the other psychostimulants, like with lisdexamphetamine or dexamphetamine. So they increase your blood pressure, they make you more at risk of psychosis. So they are still limitations of that class, that whole class of drugs anyway. And as Vic pointed out before, what we're seeing in Australia is that even though kind of irregular use in the community is going down, people that are using frequently, they're still struggling, and the harms related to methamphetamine use are going up to the point where we've had a fourfold increase in deaths in the last 10 years. So that the assumption is that there's probably a group of people that have been using for really quite a long time and quite frequently, and then all of the health consequences of that people might be at risk of. And one of the big ones is psychosis, that then is a limitation to any of these so-called agonist therapies as well. The next question is about contingency management. So I might send this one to you, Vic, and it's, what's the evidence about longer term sustainability of treatment goals using the contingency management approach?
Not the best person to talk to this, but I am aware that there's research. They've tried different sort of reinforcement or voucher payment sort of schedules, and the longer, unsurprisingly, I think it was 4 months or more, the odds of them having a negative urine was 7, I think, relative to not receiving contingency management. So there's evidence that it can help, I guess, engage people in treatment, initiate cessation, and potentially maintain it as well. But as Simon Clay's amazing research has shown, that may not be appealing to everybody. So I'm interested to learn. You mentioned the Norwegian study, Liam. I'm interested to understand, how are they using contingency management? Is it again for negative urines and abstinence? Because I think we need to think about how we diversify.
That was the Canadian study, and what they did is that study is a multi-site study, and they have community engagement at each of the sites, and each site will choose what it is that they are rewarding in the sense of what they're offering in that site. So it might be use of needle syringe programs, or it might be engagement in counselling, or whatever it is that site is kind of offering and that they feel is probably associated with positive outcomes. So because our colleagues in Canada and the community in Canada share some of our concerns that we have here with contingency management. It's not, the voucher-based management is not usual practice in Canada as far as I'm aware either. Did you want to add anything to that, Liam?
No.
Yeah.
No, that covered it. Thanks.
And I think the other point though, Vic, is that once is this correct? Once the reward ceases, the effect also ceases. Yeah. So it only is effective while you're participating, which is the same for many treatments. I mean, antihypertensive stops working when you stop it. So I don't know if that in itself is a necessary criticism, but that's probably the response. The next question from Ian Patterson's another good question. It's about buprenorphine and methamphetamine. It wasn't mentioned in the brief review of pharma interventions. Anecdotally, I've had many ex-confined individuals relate very positive experiences of decreases in meth use and cravings when taking Suboxone or buprenorphine long-acting injectable, and seek to continue these prescribed substances on release. This experience is also related by individuals starting subbies in the community in general. And Ian, it's true, I have had people wanting to come on to buprenorphine because they've heard from friends that it helps with cravings, and you've kindly put in an article there that looks at rats, and rats decrease methamphetamine use as related to the buprenorphine. In terms of humans, it hasn't been well studied. There are some studies from Iran that are looking at cravings, and there did seem to be some decreased cravings associated with buprenorphine, but it's theoretically due to the kind of kappa antagonism aspect of the buprenorphine molecule. And I don't know, Liam, if you want to talk a little bit more about why we're not so proceeding with looking at buprenorphine for methamphetamine.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess first off, the reason why it wasn't included in this talk so much was because there isn't any investigation ongoing at the moment. And this talk was really focused on, upcoming new ongoing research. When we look at the studies that have come out of Iran in humans, unfortunately, the results haven't been super convincing. And they haven't done large, I don't think anyone's really done any large, really well-controlled RCTs. But one study they did do was they did a head-to-head study comparing methadone and buprenorphine. And they found no real difference in between changes in methamphetamine use compared to people, comparing people who took methadone and buprenorphine. And I guess the results just weren't convincing enough.
Yeah. So I agree. I don't think there's enough of a signal there. And one of the groups of people that is looking for treatment for them or change in relationship with their methamphetamine use are people already on opioid agonist therapy. So we're looking for things additional that we can offer to people that are already on opioid agonist therapy as well. But it certainly is there's enough of a kind of discussion around it that it might be good to explore and interview people, at least of their experiences, and find out more from them why they're looking for it.
And one interesting thing actually is that these studies were all done before the invention of long-acting buprenorphine. So we actually don't have any data about the interaction of long-acting buprenorphine and methamphetamine use.
But yeah, I do think the prison environment, there's not many drugs on offer as well. So it's a slightly different context once people are released post-prison. Next question, in any of the studies, has there been a particular focus on young people ages 6 to 24, from Tanina? And the answer is no.
No.
The group in Melbourne did, they were looking at ketamine assisted psychotherapy in young people. But they found it very hard to find young people that were wanting to participate in that, because it's very counselling intensive and very time intensive, that trial. They found it very difficult to recruit. So that's the only young person study I'm aware of. And obviously methamphetamine use disorder in young people it's not just the drug. You probably need much more comprehensive interventions, I imagine. I don't know if you want to add to that, Vic.
Not really. I mean, this is really on young people, but the average number of counselling sessions, according to AIHW data, is 1.7. And so when we say there's no clear, winner of the horse race of psychosocial interventions, what are people really getting, I guess, is what we need to ask. And we've learned from the MATE study that intensive rehabilitation has led to improved outcomes or better outcomes. But I think what we've learned from our Ready to Change program is I think the average number of sessions was more like 3 to 4.5. So if we make it easy for people, if it's outreach, if we're calling them for the session and delivering CBT or motivational interviewing or a relapse prevention, then we know they're getting it. 1.7 sessions, it could just be assessment and planning, and then one other session of something else. So I think we need to think about how we make treatment so much more accessible and easy, so it can be fitted into people's lives.
Yeah. I'm just going to take this last question online and then hand over back to you, Wendy and Angus, for a final wrap up. The question from Karen Sherlock in Newcastle STP is around Lima. Can you confirm if the effect of reducing methamphetamine fell away whilst dosing was continued or after dosing ceased? Would a study of longer-term maintenance Listex be helpful? So, but what we saw, Karen, is that if people were going to reduce use, it happened early, pretty much in the first 4 to 8 weeks, and there was quite high dropout. So that last data point on that graph showed quite high dropout. So the effect reduced. So if people are going to reduce, they did that early. So yes, in that group of people, we're going to do further analyses, but probably in that group of people, a longer term treatment would be indicated. And this study wasn't looking at a duration of treatment. I think, Angus, you had some comments on the actual questions around duration. This study was just to see if it was worth persisting with further studies. But Angus, you had thoughts on actually how long we should be really studying to see how long we should be treating with medications.
Yeah, look, I think in terms of how long it takes to actually, you know, I would say, well, you never really recover, but I mean, in order for your brain to kind of reset to a point where you can actually be comfortable, can take, you know, at least 6 to 9 months for somebody to kind of get over the addiction of it all. So I think it could be more useful if we could start looking at some longer term studies, if they're feasible, about how we can support people through that kind of 6 to 9 month period rather than just the acute withdrawal phase.
Yeah.
Something else I wanted to mention too is I found a lot of the existing treatment modalities are failing Aboriginal people specifically. A lot of the existing treatments we've got just are not effective for Aboriginal people for whatever reason. So I think having a lot of these emerging drugs, emerging treatments is going to give a lot of hope also to Aboriginal people that there might be a better treatment, a better way to do things out there. I know that we've had amazing pharmacological treatments for opioids now for quite some time. So if we look over at that space, you know, they've got all of these options, all of these great treatments. So hoping that, you know, we'll be able to find some equivalent sort of treatments for methamphetamine use in the near future.
Yeah,
That's the plan, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it links a little bit to the last question that I wanted to throw to you, Wendy, is just about how we can actually bring in both Aboriginal people, but also people with lived and living experience into the whole process of conducting research. So right from the start, like asking what sort of questions, what are the questions we should be asking? Have you got some thoughts on that?
There needs to be, we need to really get community focused around it, speaking within the community, the elders, and everything. Like we're starting with a bit of outreach from the hospital now, so we'll be doing a lot of that. But also around the opioids, I found a lot of people that are using the opioids and on treatment within the hospital, they're still using the on top. So I've noticed that a lot, and that's through our Candy unit as well. So I'd really suggest community-based, really lean on our allies and all the other organisations around as well, because they've got a lot.
Yeah, a lot of knowledge about what might work and what won't.
Yeah, and that's where we can come in as Aboriginal health workers and all get together and really help put that research together.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to mention peer support as a great avenue to support people through methamphetamine use disorder. I know I've been able to find some good support through Narcotics Anonymous in the 12-step program. And look, I wouldn't say, for me at least, it's the be-all and end-all, the thing that's necessarily saved my life. But just to go along to a group of like-minded people, have a bit of a chat, get a bit of support from people that know what you've been through can be a really powerful thing, even if you don't follow those 12 steps. I think just anecdotally, there's a lot of people there who found freedom from ice through that 12-step program, or even just as kind of an add-on support to get that bit of peer support is a great option for people too.
Yeah, that's important. Having support and having support from people that understand and don't judge you is crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. It's 1 minute to 1 p.m. I really please everyone online. Join me in thanking our fabulous panelists here. I've really enjoyed listening to you today, and I feel like even though I spent a lot of time thinking about methamphetamine, I've learned more things today listening to how everyone's talking about it and thinking about where we can go with this, and hopefully coming together to actually help people change their relationship with methamphetamine use in a way that's meaningful for people. So thank you, everyone. Join me in thanking the team, and we'll see you all back here next year. Have a lovely end of the year. Bye.
Nadine.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.